Good day, my name is Mr. Anker and welcome to today's lesson on English Home Language Paper 2. Today we'll be looking specifically at poetry contextual questions. Now, once again, we are doing a lesson on reading and viewing as per the CAPS document and focusing on reading for meaning and evaluating, drawing conclusions and expressing our opinions. This is a basic map of how today's lesson will unfold. The objectives of today's lesson are to identify and explain basic figures of speech and to interpret poetry terms to answer questions appropriately, to acquire reading skills, recognizing and understanding how to respond to questions based on question verbs, using the correct vocabulary to respond to literature questions, and techniques to answer the questions. Here are some of the question words. Explain, to state in your own words. Describe, to use your own words to express ideas, to give a reason, to provide a reason for something. To account, once again, is also to provide a reason. To comment on, which involves showing some depth of understanding. Critically discuss, which is to weigh up the strengths and weaknesses of an idea. To critically comment, which is to be involved in making logical connections between ideas. What you should know is basic poetry terminology. You must be able to determine and identify figures of speech. You must be able to identify appropriate words to describe tone and mood. You need to understand the features of the different poems. Is it a Petrarchan sonnet? Is it an Elizabethan sonnet? Does it use free verse? Is it a ballad? Etc. And you have to be able to formulate a response based on the mark allocation. These are some of the common problems that we encounter when marking paper 2. Learners often misinterpret tone and mood. Tone refers to the way in which something is said, where mood refers to the atmosphere that is created by the words. Learners often misinterpret questioning verbs such as critically discuss and comment. Learners are unable to identify the figures of speech, which we will be looking at in more detail later. Learners lack the knowledge of basic literary terminology, like diction, imagery referring to figures of speech, and diction referring to the choice of words. And the learners have a limited understanding of the metaphorical style used when writing poetry. These are some of the competencies that you will need in order to answer and respond to the questions of the paper. However, before we delve any further into today's lesson, let's take a short commercial break. Welcome back. Now, as per our lesson plan, let's start looking at various terminologies that are important for understanding poetry. Diction, which refers to the intentional or specific use of words. Tone, which refers to the speaker's attitude or feelings in a poem. Mood, which refers to the atmosphere that is created by the use of specific diction. Atmosphere, the feeling created by the description used in the poem. Attitude, the feeling expressed about a topic or a person. Stanza, this is the term that we use to describe the paragraphs within a poem. Symbolism, the use of symbols to represent ideas or qualities. Now let's look at the various figures of speech, which is very important to understanding imagery within a poem. Alliteration. This refers to the repetition of initial consonant sounds. Like in Fernhill, high as the house, the HH alliteration. Allusion. An allusion is a reference to another text. It can be a film, a book, or a play. Anaphora. This occurs when a word or phrase is repeated at the beginning of successive sentences or clause. So that is an anaphora. Apostrophe. Apostrophe involves the addressing of someone who's absent or dead, or an abstract idea or inanimate object, like in prayer to masks. Irony. Irony is the juxtaposition between what is expected and what occurs. A metaphor. A metaphor is an indirect comparison where two unlike things are compared to highlight a shared quality. For instance, in This Winter Coming, the women are described as a tide of sadness. Onomatopoeia. This involves words that imitate the sound associated with an action or an object, like bang, slam. Personification. In personification, human attributes are assigned to objects or animals. In Solitude, we use the earth is described as the sad old earth. Simile. A simile uses the words like or as to compare two different things. For example, in Sonnet 130, the speaker dismisses the simile, her eyes are like the sun, by stating her eyes are nothing like the sun. Now, let's look at basic poetry analysis of the various poems. Fernhill is a poem by Dylan Thomas. The message of the poem refers to childhood versus confinements of adulthood. Then the theme is about childhood joy and innocence, harmony and wonder of nature, and the power of time. The mood is full of nostalgia. It's wistful. The tone for the first 5 stanzas is one of joy and happiness. And then the last stanza is one of sorrow and lamentation. The form, it has 6 stanzas of 9 lines each. This Winter Coming by Karen Press. The title refers to winter, which is associated with the death and difficult times. The message is a reflection on oppression and the hardships that were experienced during the state of emergency. The theme is one of suffering and oppression. It's all about the apartheid rule and the effects thereof. The mood is anxious, restless, and extremely frightened. The tone is quite somber, which means sad and depressed and solemn. The form is 5 stanzas which use free verse and enjambment. Enjambment refers to run-on lines. Solitude by Ella Wheeler Wilcox. When times are tough, friends are few. That is what the title refers to. Solitude means isolation or by yourself. Message. The positivity attracts good company and negativity alienates people. It's like a repellent to people. It scares them off. The theme would be positivity versus negativity. The mood is one of indifference. It's also reflective and melancholic, which means very sad. The tone is cynical, satirical, and sarcastic. The form is 3 stanzas of 8 lines, using the ABCDEFE rhyme scheme. At a Funeral by Dennis Brutus is written for, specifically, Valencia Majombozi, who died fighting for her freedom. The message is about the plight of the oppressed. This is also an apartheid poem. The theme is one of oppression, human sacrifice, fighting for freedom, and aborted hope. The mood is melancholic and vengeful. The tone in stanza 1 is calm and reverent, and then which is respectful. And stanza 2, the tone changes to angry and contemptuous. The form has 2 stanzas. We've got the rhyme scheme of AAA, BAB, CCC, DC, D. Prayer to masks. The masks symbolize the ancestors, as is evidenced in the title. The message is an awareness of the effects of colonization. So this is not an apartheid poem. It's a poem about African colonization. Do not get apartheid poems and poems that speak about the oppression of colonization confused in your exams. Theme shows respect for ancestors and the loss of culture through modernization. The mood would be hopeful and meditative. The tone is one of respect, praise, and reverence. Remember, reverence means utmost respect. The form, it has one stanza and is written in free verse. The Poem of Return by Geoffrey Rocha is a poet's return from exile. The message is those who fight for freedom are the true heroes, not those who are exiled. The theme of the poem is one of alienation, estrangement, patriotism, and sacrifice. The mood is pensive. The tone is earnest, honest, nostalgic, which means to think back, and humble. The form has 3 stanzas and also uses enjambment. Talk to the Peach Tree by Sipho Sepamla. The peach tree was a place of gathering. So this is where all the people would gather together within their various communities. The awareness of the harsh realities of apartheid. So the oppressed people would be discussing apartheid at the peach tree. The theme is freedom of speech, rebellion against oppression, which in this case, the oppression would be apartheid segregation. The mood is apprehensive and anxious. The tone would be conversation and cynical. There are 10 stanzas in this poem and 9 stanzas of 2 lines. The last stanza has 3 lines and it is also written in free verse. The next poem is called A Child Who Was Shot Dead. This is written by Ingrid Jonker and translated from an Afrikaans poem. This poem speaks to the past laws during apartheid. So here we are dealing with an apartheid poem. The message is to call an end to the suffering and to protest the harsh apartheid laws. The theme is one of protest and resistance, a sense of nationalism. It is a cry for freedom of oppression and apartheid. The mood is angry, it's protesting, and it's unrelenting. The tone is determined, passionate, and inspirational, asking people to stand up and rise up against the injustices of apartheid. The form, it has 5 stanzas and a coda, and is written in free verse. The Morning Sun is Shining is written by Olive Schreiner. The title refers to early morning, which is a new day, a life and color to nature. The message is contrasting the beauty of nature with the suffering of humans. The theme is one of permanence of nature, despair and loneliness, grief and the futility of life and relationships. The mood is joyous, cheerful, and then it shifts in line 13 to quite somber and despairing. The tone is joyous and peaceful in lines 1 to 12. Then it is quite sorrowful in lines 13 to 16, and one could even say in line 15 and 16, it becomes quite bitter. The form is lyrical, and it uses anaphora in lines 1 to 12 to show the admiration of nature. And it also, in lines 13 to 16, uses no anaphora to indicate the human loss component. These are just some of the important poems we have to look at and analyze and study in terms of the various poetic devices in order to be ready for our examinations. But let's take a breather and we'll be back after this short commercial break. Welcome back. Now we'll be looking at some important exam answering techniques. Answering technique, some problems. Learners often misinterpret the tone and the mood of the poem. Now remember, we said tone refers to the way something is said, and mood refers to the atmosphere that is created. Learners misinterpret the questioning verbs, such as account for, explain, comment on, etc. Learners are unable to identify the figures of speech. We've gone through some of them at the beginning of our lesson. Learners do not refer to the mark allocation when answering the question. If you see the mark allocation is 2 marks, please ensure that you do not write lengthy and copious amounts of words within an answer, as it would be seen as redundant. Try and have 2 clear, distinct points, and you will be awarded your 2 marks. Now, how to answer your question paper. The question paper has a total of 80 marks. You will be required to answer questions from 3 sections. You must answer 2 seen poems and a compulsory unseen poem. The poetry section equates to 30 marks in total. 1 question in the poetry section will be the poetry essay question. The other 3 seen poems will be the contextual. So, you must do 2 seen poems. That means if you do the poetry essay, you have to do 1 of the contextual questions. If you don't want to do the poetry essay, you must do 2 seen contextual questions. Then there's also a compulsory unseen poem, which is also a contextual question. Remember, you must have some knowledge of the central message, the idea, and the theme of the poem. Now, let's look at some answering techniques. When you are asked a question on impression, what impression is created by the word thick? So, when we look at the specific lines in This Winter Coming, what does the word thick, the diction thick, what impression do you gather from that? So, analyze the identified word of the line, walking in the thick rain. This phrase implies that the rain is difficult to walk through. It is dense. Step 2. Explain the response that the identified word evokes from you. The impression aspect. The speaker conveys a sense that the rain is oppressive. The word thick creates the impression that the rain is difficult to walk through and is oppressive or dense. And that will score you your 2 marks. So remember, step 1, you have to analyze the identified word. In this case, it would be thick. And then step 2, you have to say, what do you feel when you hear or see this word? What impression is created from it? Now, let's look at mood. Glee, the great storm is over. Also look at the use of the exclamation marks. So identify and explain the mood in line 1. You will get 1 mark for the identification and the 2nd mark for the explanation. So, step 1 would be to analyze the words in line 1 and to identify the mood. Glee, the great storm is over. The exclamation glee creates a mood of joy, happiness, relief. Then, step 2, use the analysis to show how a particular feeling or atmosphere comes through. That the danger presented by the storm has passed. Your final response, the exclamation glee creates the mood of joy. So here we've identified the mood. Now we've also explained the mood, that the danger presented by the storm has passed. And that will score you your 2 marks. It is a beauteous evening, calm and free. Now let's look at the tone. Remember, when you look at tone, you need to also refer to diction. Thou liest in Abraham's bosom all year, and worshipst at the temple's inner shrine, God being with thee when we know not. Critically comment on how the speaker's tone conveys the central idea. The central idea is what the poem is about. What is the main message of the poem? So, step 1 is to identify the literary technique in the question. In this question, the literary technique is tone. Step 2, discuss this technique using evidence from the poem. And evidence would obviously refer to the use of diction. So, the diction that we're using is the child is described as lying in Abraham's bosom, connecting children with the spiritual divine world. Abraham is a biblical prophet. The image of the inner shrine, once again, we are referring to diction. further depicts the child as being special and entitled to worship in the inner sanctum, the holiest place. Then in step 3, we have to show how the technique captures the central message of the poem. So here we've got 3 things we need to do. We need to look at the speaker's tone, identify it, we need to comment on it, and then we need to say how it conveys the central message. Your answer will thus be structured like this. The speaker uses powerful religious images in these lines, conveying a tone of reverence and contemplation. So this was the first step, identifying the tone. The child is described as lying in Abraham's bosom. Abraham is a special biblical prophet. Here we've used the diction. These images reinforce the central idea of the innocence of children and their innate connection to God and nature. And here we have understood the message of the poem. And in order to score those 3 marks, all 3 aspects of the question need to be answered. Talk to the peach tree. Let's look at diction. So diction refers to the choice of words. Explain the use of the word stench in line 14. Firstly, we are going to identify the word related to the instruction question. So here we are looking at explain, right? So explain means to give a comment on something in terms of to analyze it a little bit further. Ask how the stench is like down there. Then, analyze the words that you have identified in step 1 by focusing on what is conveyed. So, the word stench suggests a horrible and disgusting smell. So, now we are defining what the word stench means. Then use the analysis of the word to elaborate on the answer, the instruction in the question, which is explain. This implies that the living conditions for people of color were awful and inhumane during apartheid. The people of color were treated as lacking value and they were seen as disposable. Stench might also imply that the apartheid system was rotten and unbearable. The word stench suggests a horrible, disgusting smell. That is our first mark. And then the second one is implying that the living conditions of people of color were awful and inhumane during apartheid. Now, let's look at questions beginning with the word comment on. Comment on. Remember, this refers to giving your opinion of something. That's the first aspect of the question, the effectiveness. So how effective it is of this image conveying the poet's message. So we must refer to specific image within these lines and how effective it is in giving the message of the poem. Now, explain the identified image. So the identified image would be scream the smell of justice and blood. So we've identified it. So what is the image that is created? The words scream and smell are sensory words that connect the reader with feelings of pain felt by the oppressed people, and highlights the intense pain, the blood, by using the word blood, that has to be endured as they fight for their freedom, looking for justice. So comment, the second aspect, so give your opinion, right? On this image, the image draws our attention to the determination and the resolve of the youth who are willing to sacrifice their lives for freedom. Your final response. The words scream and smell connect the reader with feelings of pain felt by the oppressed and highlights the intense pain, blood, endured by those who fight for the freedom, justice. The image draws attention to the determination of the youth who are willing to sacrifice their lives for freedom. So in this last component, we are dealing with the message of the poem, where here we've explained the image. Now, our first practice question is from the November 2023 paper. It's on Talk to the Peach Tree. Remember, we said we have to start by highlighting the relevant information. So where you see imagery, tone, and structure, you have to highlight it. The first question asks us, explain the use of the word stench in line 14. Now, let's quickly look at the context of it. In line 14, ask how the stench is like down there. So, what does stench mean? That's the first step. And then explain why the poet would use this word. So, the word stench suggests a horrible, disgusting smell. So now we have defined what the term is. Secondly, this implies that the living conditions of people of color were awful and inhumane during apartheid. The people of color were treated as lacking value or as disposable. If you have just written these two things down, you already would have gotten your 2 marks. Now remember, explain means to state something in your own words, whereas account for means to give a reason. Account for the repetition of the phrase, let's talk, throughout the poem. So, why would the speaker use repetition? The repetition creates a sense of urgency. So it is used to make a matter more pressing, more urgent, and indicates the speaker's strong desire for a discussion. Or you could have said it emphasizes the need for open communication and a peaceful resolution. Or you could have said it indicates the speaker's insistence on continuing the dialogue, even though previous attempts were futile. So you could have referred to a sense of urgency, how it emphasizes, or that it becomes insistent, because that is often what we do when we repeat something. Refer to lines 11 to 12. Talk to the paralyzing heat in the air. Inquire how long the mercilessness were lost. Identify the figure of speech in line 11. Talk to the paralyzing heat, right? So the heat is paralyzing in the air. So what figure of speech would that be? A metaphor or personification, because the effects of the heat is compared to something that is paralyzing. It could also be personification because we're giving a human-like quality to the heat. Both would award you a mark. Now comment on the effectiveness of this image. Now we need to say why the speaker decided to use that specific image. The apartheid system is compared to paralyzing heat. The word paralyzing indicates a lack of movement, which refers to the restrictive apartheid laws. The word heat emphasizes the stifling, oppressive nature of the apartheid system. Or you could say, mercilessness of the oppressors is emphasized by the question of how long their callous treatment of people will have to be endured. This effectively conveys how the apartheid regime inflicted suffering on people of color. Both these answers would score you 2 marks. Now, let's look at the next question. Refer to lines 19 to 21. Come on, let's talk to the devil himself. It's about time. Discuss how these lines, so these 3 lines, convey the central message, so what the poem is about in the poem. The final stanza conveys a sense of urgency, resignation, cynicism, and a realization that for a resolution to be found, the oppressed will have to be courageous in overcoming their aversion to dealing with the apartheid government by conversing with the devil. So, it's asking us of how these words and the images that they contain display the essential message. So if we look at this, here we've got an image that's calling the apartheid government the devil, which obviously shows how evil this apartheid regime has been. And also it creates a sense of urgency. Come on, it's encouraging, it's saying, we have to do this. Despite the apparent futility in communicating with the oppressive system, there is no other option but to engage with the enemy. And the enemy in this instance would obviously be the apartheid regime. The blunt closing instruction highlights the inevitability of the dialogue with the regime. So inevitability refers to it is bound to happen. 3 marks are only given to you if a critical discussion is linked to the essential message. And here, in the closing, in this little section over here, we are giving the essential message of the poem. Now, I think we need to take a quick commercial break before we look at more ways of answering these contextual questions. Welcome back. Now, let's look at more past paper questions. We'll be looking at Shipwreck by Emily Dickinson. Remember once again to highlight the important aspects of imagery, tone, and structure throughout the poem. Identify and explain the mood in line 1. In line 1, this is what we have. Glee, the great storm is over. Look at the specifics. Look at the use of the exclamation. Look at the word glee, which means happiness, joy, celebration. And then now it's asking us to firstly identify the mood and then explain why. So we've already stipulated that the glee refers to joy or elation. And why is it that there's such joy? It's because of the relief that the danger presented by the storm has passed. So, your first mark will be given to you for identifying the correct mood. And then the second mark would be for explaining how you identified the mood. Refer to line 7. Neighbor and friend and bridegroom. Explain why the victims of the shipwreck are described in this manner. So let's look at line 7. Neighbor, friend, and bridegroom. Think quickly. What do all 3 these words have in common? They all refer to a relationship. Now, explain why the victims, so the neighbors, the friends, the bridegrooms of the shipwreck are described in this manner. Why would the speaker specifically point out these various relationships that people have? Explain means to state in your own words. So, the words acknowledge the close and varied relationships which we just identified by looking at the words that exist between people within the community. This intensifies the sense of loss. So because these people were so close and had such good relationships, it makes it incredibly sad then when we hear that they tragically died. And this makes the tragedy more personal and real. Or the deceased were part of a community and each one may have left behind a loved one, thus intensifying the sense of loss. So the commonality is that in both these responses is that it intensifies the tragedy and the sense of loss. Now, let's look at the next question. Refer to lines 3 to 4. 40 gone down together into the boiling sand. Identify the figure of speech used in these lines. So 40 gone down. So gone down, if we think about gone down, what does it imply to us? It is euphemizing the fact that 40 people have passed because of the troublesome seas into the boiling sand. Yeah, we have a metaphor. Now, we have to identify for 3.3.1, which we've just done, and then we need to refer to the effectiveness. So we said it's a metaphor because it's comparing the sand to something that is boiling, and the gone down is euphemizing the death of the people. Now, why is this image effective? What point does the speaker make by using these words? The storm has caused huge surges of water to stir up the ocean bed and has created a dangerous concoction of sand and water. The turbulent whirling motion of the rough sea is similar to the bubbling movement of boiling water. So if we're saying that it is a metaphor, we are describing why this metaphor is effective. The image is effective because it emphasizes the violence and the terror of 40 people who lost their lives under such horrific circumstances. Now, critically discuss. So this means to give a detailed account on what it means, to thoroughly engage with the indicated lines and refer to the strengths and weaknesses of the idea. So the effectiveness of these lines as a conclusion to the poem. So it says, then a silence suffices the story, as a softness the teller's eyes, and the children no further question, and only the waves reply. The last stanza is effective. So here we are saying whether it's effective or not, but that will not give you a mark. Your justification will, as it conveys the finality of death and the idea that nature is a powerful force. People are at the mercy of nature and it cannot be controlled. There's a poignant acceptance of the mysterious workings of nature. The children realize that there is no way of explaining a natural disaster that claims so many lives. So here we are referring to the children. Look at the specific examples that we see in these lines. There is an acknowledgement that only the waves have the answers. So the reply, and only the waves reply, only they have the answers. There are some things that are inexplicable, so that means it cannot be explained and beyond the comprehension of people. Now, let's look at our next poem, the Poem of Return by Geoffrey Rocha. Explain the use of the word silence in line 1 in the context of the poem. So here, so it's asking us to explain. So once again, we need to provide some details as to why the word silence is being used. The word silence suggests that the speaker's time in exile has been lonely. Silence as in he had no one to speak to. He misses hearing the sounds of home. Being in exile, he feels that his voice of protest may be censored. So it refers to two aspects here. Firstly, that he has experienced loneliness or isolation in exile. And secondly, that he fears that his voice of protest is going to be censored. 2 marks for 2 distinct points. Account for the use of the ellipses in line 10. So here, bring me the long night of sleeplessness, with mothers mourning, their arms bereft of sons. When I return from the land of exile and silence, no, do not bring me flowers. So, the ellipsis specifically in the context of this line. The ellipsis creates a dramatic pause. So if you know your punctuation, you will know that ellipsis creates a sense of a pause, and then it often brings focus to something. In this instance, it is focusing on the fact that he does not want any flowers. So you'll be credited for the dramatic pause, but also by stating that he does not want any flowers. Or you could say that the ellipsis uses creates a sense of anticipation to find out what it is that the speaker actually wants, seeing as he does not want flowers. Also, please look at the questions mark allocation, which is only 2 marks. Identify the figure of speech in these lines. Bring me rather all the dews, tears of dawns which witnessed dramas. So let's identify, bring me rather all the dews, tears of dawns, right? So this is quite a human-like quality which witnessed drama. So the dawns now have witnessed something. What figure of speech do we have? Personification. Then comment on the effectiveness of this image. Dawn is personified. So now we're explaining why it's personification and why it's effective. Suggests that witnessing all the tragedy, so witnessing this drama, has brought it to tears, sadness. The injustices that people have suffered have been so immense and frequent that even nature responds with a sense of grief and sorrow. Critically discuss how the final stanza reinforces the central message of the poem. You will often see that the last question of a poem in a contextual nature would be on the central message or the main idea of the poem, and that tests the poem in its entirety. So, bring me only just this, the last wish of heroes fallen at daybreak, with a wingless stone in hand, and a thread of anger shaking from their eyes. So when you refer to the effectiveness or critically discuss how it reinforces a central message, you must actually refer to the specifics, looking at the diction, looking at the images that you possibly find within these lines. Remember, critically discuss refers to thoroughly engaging with these lines. The stanza conveys how the speaker wants only one thing, as bring me only just this. The word just this, one thing, right? Justice for people who have lost their lives in the struggle for freedom. So this is what the speaker wants. This is the one thing, okay, that he wants. He views the people who died for the cause as the real heroes. So there we're using the diction to answer, as they fought a difficult and hopeless battle. So the wingless stone refers to a hopeless battle. There was no hope for them. The speaker is angry and insistent that their last wish be fulfilled. And their last wish obviously was to be free of oppression. So here we've got the 3 ideas. But remember, the central message, right, is this, which is contained in the last sentence of the answers. So ensure that you always have the central idea or the central message of the poem in your response and conclude with that in your answer. Now, let's quickly go for a short commercial break, whereafter we will wrap things up and look at the key aspects of today's lesson. Welcome back. Now, let's revise some key concepts of today's lesson. We read for viewing and understanding today, looking at reading and meaning, and then we evaluated the content, drawing conclusion and expressing our opinions on the various poems. Then we had a wonderful lesson looking at the terminology, understanding the basic analysis of the poems, and knowing how to approach the questions with proper answering techniques. These are some of the key words that we were taught today. Explain, to state something in your own words. Describe, to use your own words to express your ideas. To give a reason. Obviously, that means to provide a reason in your own words. Account for, to say why, or once again, to provide a reason. Comment on or discuss, which shows that you have an in-depth understanding of something. To critically discuss, which means to weigh up the strengths and the weaknesses of an idea or statement. To critically comment, this involves being able to make logical connections. These are some of the common errors that are made. Learners often misinterpret tone and mood. Tone being the way something is said. Mood, which implies the atmosphere that is created by the words. These concepts are often confused for the other. Then, learners often misinterpret the questioning verbs, which we just went over, critically discuss and comment. Learners are also unable to identify the various figures of speech. Figures of speech include metaphors, similes, hyperboles, euphemism, personification. Learners lack the knowledge of basic literary terminology, such as diction, which implies the use of words, imagery, the images created by the words or figures of speech. Learners have a limited understanding of the metaphorical style used in writing poetry. These are very important competencies and skills that you will need in order to write and answer questions on contextual poems. Then, if you feel the need to practice further, which is highly recommended, go to your computers and in your search engines, type these papers. It is pivotal that you practice past exam papers to ensure that you are ready for that final examination. It was wonderful to spend this lesson with you. I truly do hope that you were able to learn something today and that you will be able to apply some of these skills and strategies when you sit and write your final English Home Language Paper 2 examination. Good luck for your exams.